Trey Gowdy at committee hearings is awfully entertaining and quite insightful. Here he is questioning Sarah Saldana from ICE.
Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina and chairman of the Subcommittee on Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Director, I want to thank you for your service as a prosecutor and as a school teacher. I am biased towards both, so I hope that my questioning does not reflect that bias, but I do thank you for doing both of those jobs are incredibly hard. I thank you for your service. You have cited the Zavados case, and that explains 8% of the releases. How about the other 92%?
I'm sorry, sir, 8% of any releases?
8% of the 30,558 convicted criminal alien releases were under the holding of Zavados.
That's in 2014, yes.
Right, so there 92% were not.
No, another 10,000 or 35% were under orders from the immigration courts that we have to comply with.
All right. I want to back up and ask you to put on your old hat. Prosecutorial discretion. What are the limits of prosecutorial discretion?
They're on a situational basis, sir. I think you're very familiar with the process where you kind of have to decide, can you take a fraud case with $1 million loss, which is substantial to many victims, or do you have to limit it to cases above $5 million? It depends on resources and the safety issues in your specific community.
Right, and there would be declination levels based on the amount of loss, and there would be declination levels based on drug amounts, and bank robberies could either go state or federal,
exactly.
Usually depending on how good the case was. But immigration cases can't go state or federal. They can only go federal. So you mentioned in your testimony that you counted 3,000 statutes that you were responsible for enforcing as a United States attorney. How many of those 3,000 did you announce ahead of time that you were not going to prosecute anyone under that particular statute?
Announce it to the general public?
Ahead of time.
No, I didn't do that.
Right.
I think many people knew what they were somehow. You know, you can't limit everybody. We shared those priorities with all the federal agencies that we work with.
But again, you always have the recourse of going through the state. The state can vindicate Texas has narcotic statutes, Texas has fraud statutes, bad check statutes, so there's always a safety net. If it didn't meet your declination level, the state could step in.
That's correct.
And I am stunned, and I'm sure you may be too. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You worked with state and local law enforcement as a prosecutor, right?
Yes, sir.
And you would have worked with them in the full range of cases, from child pornography to OCDF cases, so you name it. There's a state and local officer at the table with federal officers, right?
That's absolutely correct.
So why are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle so resistant to giving state and local law enforcement officers any role at all in immigration?
To the extent they're here, I guess you could ask them. I'm not sure I can answer for anybody else here.
Well, in their defense, I'll give you the excuses that I get, that the statute's too complicated, that you can't possibly expect state and local law enforcement officers to understand the complexities of our immigration law, as if DUI laws are not also complex, or RICO.
I'm not aware of that. I can't speak to that.
The state and local law enforcement officers you work with, did you think that they were capable of understanding the complexities of immigration law?
I'm sorry. No, that someone on the other side of the aisle has that view. I don't know that.
Well, they do. Let me ask you this. Prosecutorial discretion, does it apply in all categories of law? You know, some laws require you to do something like register for selective service. Some forbid you from doing something like possession of narcotics. And some laws, for instance, Congress could make you issue us a report. Are you able to exercise prosecutorial discretion in all three of those categories of law?
Well, I certainly can with respect to the first one.
Right.
I know you'd be on my case if I did with respect to the third one, so I would say no. And I can't remember what your second one was.
the laws that force you to do something, register for selective service?
I mean, I don't enforce that law, registration for selective service.
I know. You're a smart lawyer, and you've got a broad background. I really, all politics aside, I think it's important that our fellow citizens understand whether there are any limits to this doctrine of prosecutorial discretion, because my time is up, and I know that the gentleman from Idaho is going to gavel me in just a second. But there's a big difference between you exercising your discretion not to do a $20,000 fraud case in Texas and your decision to confer benefits on that same group. Those are two entirely separate legal concepts. And regardless of who's in the White House and regardless of what job you and I have, I do think it's important that we have some bright lines so people understand what the limits of this thing we call prosecutorial discretion is. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from Idaho.
Thank you very much. And I now recognize the gentlelady from